When my husband passed away, I went to the farm he had forbidden me to visit for 23 years. What I found there did not prove he had betrayed me. It proved everyone else had. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Henry Whitmore was buried on a gray Tuesday morning, under a sky that looked as tired as I felt. I stood beside his grave in my black wool coat, holding a white rose in both hands because my fingers would not stop trembling. We had been married for 46 years. 46 years of mortgage payments, Sunday dinners, hospital waiting rooms, Christmas mornings, quiet arguments, and quieter forgiveness. At 68, I thought I knew every corner of the man I had shared my life with. His favorite coffee mug. The way he cleared his throat before telling bad news. The scar on his left thumb from fixing our porch railing in 1989. But there was one thing I never understood. The farm. Whitmore Farm sat 40 miles outside Lexington, past horse fences, tobacco barns, and long stretches of road where the land seemed to breathe under the open Kentucky sky. Henry inherited it from his father before we married, but in all our years together, he never once took me there. Not once. Whenever I asked, his face changed. Not angry exactly. Worse than angry. Closed. Maggie, he would say, using the name only he called me, promise me you'll never go out there. At first, I thought it was grief. Maybe the place held memories of his parents. Then, as the years passed, I wondered if it held something else. A woman. A child. A mistake he could not bear to explain. I hated myself for wondering that. But when a husband locks one place away from his wife for more than 2 decades, a woman's mind starts filling the silence with terrible things. After the funeral, we gathered at my house. Not for comfort. At least, that was how it felt. My son Daniel stood near the fireplace, checking his phone every few minutes. His wife, Vanessa, moved through my living room like she already owned the furniture. She wore a cream-colored dress and spoke in a soft voice meant for other people to hear. Margaret shouldn't have to worry about complicated property matters right now, she told Mr. Callahan, Henry's attorney. She's grieving. Daniel and I can help manage things. Help. That word sounded gentle until Vanessa used it. Mr. Callahan was in his 70s, with silver hair and the same leather briefcase he had carried for as long as I could remember. He did not answer her. He simply looked at me. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, Henry left specific instructions. The room became quiet. Even Vanessa stopped moving. Mr. Callahan opened his briefcase and placed 3 things on my coffee table. A sealed envelope. A brass key darkened with age. And a folded paper with an address written in Henry's handwriting. I knew that address before I touched it. My chest tightened so sharply I had to sit down. Vanessa stepped closer. Is that the farm? Mr. Callahan ignored her again. Daniel finally looked up from his phone. For a moment, I saw something strange in his face. Not surprise. Fear. I picked up the key. It was heavier than I expected, cold against my palm. What did Henry want me to do with this? I asked. Mr. Callahan's voice softened. He wanted you to go there before signing anything. Before discussing the estate. Before allowing anyone to advise you otherwise. Vanessa let out a small laugh. That's ridiculous. That place is just old land. Daniel said it hasn't been useful in years. I turned to my son. You've been there? Daniel looked down. That silence hurt more than an answer. For 23 years, my husband had forbidden me from stepping onto that farm. And somehow my son and daughter-in-law knew more about it than I did. I looked back at the key in my hand. All those years, I thought Henry had been keeping a secret from me because he did not trust me with the truth. But as Vanessa stared at that envelope with hunger she did not bother to hide, I began to wonder if I had misunderstood everything. Maybe the farm was not where Henry had hidden his shame. Maybe it was where he had hidden my protection. I slipped the key into the pocket of my coat. Vanessa noticed. Her smile disappeared. "Margaret," she said carefully, "you should not drive 40 miles alone in your condition." My condition. As if grief had turned me into furniture. I stood slowly, smoothing the front of my black dress. "For 46 years, I said, I was Henry Whitmore's wife. I think I can manage a country road." No one spoke. Not Daniel. Not Vanessa. Not even Mr. Callahan. That afternoon, while the sympathy flowers wilted in my kitchen and my husband's coat still hung by the back door, I walked to the garage, started my old Buick, and drove toward the one place Henry had begged me never to go. The farm he banned me from. The farm that would change everything I knew about him. The road to Whitmore Farm felt longer than 40 miles. I had driven it only once before, years ago, by accident. Henry had been in the passenger seat that day. We had taken a wrong turn after visiting friends near Versailles, and when I saw the weathered sign at the edge of the road, I remember saying, "Isn't that your family's place?" He reached across the console so quickly his hand startled me. "Turn around, Maggie." That was all he said. Not please. Not I'll explain later. Just those two words, spoken in a voice I had never heard from him before. Now, 23 years later, I was driving that same road alone, with his brass key in my coat pocket and his funeral still fresh on my skin. The countryside passed in quiet pieces. White fences. Empty fields. A mailbox leaning to one side. A faded red barn with half its roof patched in tin. The kind of places Henry used to point out when we were younger, telling me which families owned what land, who had sold to developers, who had held on too long. But he never spoke about this farm. Never. The silence around it had become part of our marriage, like a locked room in the middle of a house we both pretended not to notice. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, though the road was empty. My black dress felt too tight under my coat. The collar scratched my neck. I had not eaten since morning, except for half a biscuit someone placed on a plate and I forgot to finish. Grief does strange things to the body. It makes your hands heavy. It makes familiar roads look unfamiliar. It makes you hear a dead man's voice in the quiet between fence posts. "Promise me you'll never go out there." I almost turned back twice. The first time was when I passed a gas station and realized I could still pretend I had listened to him. I could go home, place the key in a drawer, and let Daniel and Vanessa handle whatever they were so eager to handle. The second time was when my phone rang. Vanessa. Her name appeared on the screen, bright and demanding. I let it ring. Then Daniel called. I let that ring, too. A minute later, a text came through. "Mom, Vanessa is worried. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." I pulled over beside a field of dry grass and read those words 3 times. Harder for whom? For me, the woman who had just buried her husband? Or for them, the 2 people who suddenly seemed very interested in keeping me away from land they claimed had no value? I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. For most of my life, I had been the kind of woman who answered immediately. I returned calls. I smoothed over tension. I made excuses for sharp words and cold behavior because family, I believed, deserved patience. But sitting there on the side of that Kentucky road, with Henry's key in my pocket and my son's message glowing beside me, I felt something inside me go still. Not angry. Not yet. Just still. The way the air feels before a storm reaches the porch. I started the car again. 10 minutes later, I saw the gate. It was made of black iron, taller than I expected, with vines growing through the bars. On the stone pillar beside it, nearly hidden beneath moss, were the words, "Whitmore Farm." I stopped the Buick in front of it and turned off the engine. For a long moment, I did nothing. The land beyond the gate rolled wide and quiet under the gray afternoon sky. There was a long gravel drive, a line of old oak trees, and beyond them, the roof of a farmhouse I had only ever imagined. It was not abandoned. That was the first thing I noticed. The grass had been cut. The fence had been repaired. Someone had cared for this place. My breath caught. Henry had not simply locked away a memory. He had maintained a life here. I stepped out of the car, and the cold air pressed against my face. The key felt heavier as I took it from my pocket. My fingers trembled so badly it took 3 tries to fit it into the lock. When the gate finally opened, the sound was low and rough, like something old waking up. I drove slowly down the gravel road, each tire crunch sounding too loud in the quiet. The farmhouse came into view piece by piece. White siding. Green shutters. A wraparound porch. 2 rocking chairs near the front door. 2. I stared at them longer than I should have. 1 chair might have meant loneliness. 2 meant someone had sat with him. That old suspicion rose in my chest again, sharp and unwanted. A woman. A secret. A whole part of his life where I had not been welcome. I parked near the porch and stepped out. Before I reached the front steps, the farmhouse door opened. An elderly man stood there in a denim jacket and work boots, his gray hair tucked beneath a faded cap. He looked at me as if he had been expecting me for years. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly. I stopped at the bottom step. "You know who I am?" He removed his cap. "Yes, ma'am. Henry showed me your picture every Christmas." My throat tightened. "Who are you?" "Earl Patterson," he said. "I've looked after this place for your husband for 21 years. 21 years. I gripped the porch railing. Behind me, my phone began ringing again inside the car. Neither of us turned toward it. Earl looked past me, toward the locked gate, then back at my face. "You came alone?" "Yes." He nodded, almost relieved. "That's good," he said. "Mr. Henry said if you ever came here, I was to let you in. But only you." The wind moved through the oak trees. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "Why did my husband keep this place from me?" Earl's eyes softened, but there was sadness in them, too. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "your husband wasn't hiding this farm because he didn't love you." He opened the door wider. "He was hiding it because he knew one day, somebody would try to take everything from you." I stood on that porch with one hand on the railing and the other pressed against my coat pocket, where Henry's key still rested. "Somebody would try to take everything from you." Those words did not feel like a warning. They felt like an answer to a question I had been too afraid to ask. Earl stepped aside, and I entered the farmhouse. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not dust. Not mold. Not the stale scent of a forgotten building. It smelled of lemon oil, wood smoke, and old paper. Someone had kept the place clean. Someone had opened windows, swept floors, polished the oak table in the front room. Henry had not abandoned this farm. He had preserved it. The living room was simple. A brown leather sofa. A stone fireplace. 2 lamps with creamed shades. On the mantel sat a row of framed photographs. I walked toward them slowly, bracing myself for a face I did not know. A woman with Henry's hand on her shoulder. A child with his eyes. A family that had existed in the shadows of mine. But the first photograph was of Henry and me on our 25th anniversary. I was wearing a blue dress. He was standing behind me with both hands on my shoulders, smiling like he had everything in the world he needed. The second photograph was of Daniel at age 10, sitting on a pony, grinning with both front teeth missing. The third was our house in Lexington after we planted the dogwood tree. I touched the frame with my fingertips. "He kept these here?" I asked. Earl nodded. "Every room, ma'am. Your husband never spent a day here pretending he wasn't married." That sentence weakened me more than I expected. For years, I had imagined this place as a wound in our marriage. A locked door behind which Henry kept the truth he could not bear to share. But my face was on the mantel. My son's face was there, too. Earl watched me quietly, giving me time. Older people understand silence in a way younger people rarely do. They know grief needs room to turn around before it can speak. I moved to the window and looked out across the fields. Beyond the barn, I could see a narrow road leading toward a second building, long and low, with a green metal roof. "What is that?" I asked. "The office," Earl said. "Mr. Henry kept records there." "What kind of records?" Earl's mouth tightened. "The kind he didn't want your daughter-in-law finding." My phone rang again from somewhere deep in my purse. This time, I took it out. "Daniel." I stared at his name until the call stopped. Then a message appeared. "Mom, come home. Vanessa says you're being manipulated by Dad's old farmhand." I almost laughed. Manipulated. That word had been used on me so many times in the last few years, always when I began asking questions. When I asked why Vanessa had started collecting our mail before I could see it, Daniel said I was reading too much into things. When I asked why Henry's bank statements stopped coming to the house, Vanessa told me they had switched everything to digital because paper was too confusing at my age. When I asked why Daniel no longer came by alone, without his wife standing beside him, he said families changed and I needed to accept that. Little moments. Small explanations. Tiny doors closing one by one. At the time, I told myself I was being sensitive. A mother afraid of losing her son. A wife frightened by her husband's illness. A woman getting older in a world that begins speaking around you instead of to you. But standing inside that farmhouse, I saw those memories differently. Not as misunderstandings. As patterns. Earl looked at my phone. "They know you're here." "Yes." "Did you tell them?" No, his face darkened. I felt the chill before he spoke. "Then they've been watching for this day." I turned to him. "What day?" Earl walked to a small desk near the hallway and opened the top drawer. He took out a brown envelope with my name written across the front in Henry's handwriting. Margaret and Whitmore. Not Maggie. Not sweetheart. My full legal name. The name Henry used only when something mattered. Earl held it with both hands before giving it to me. "He told me if you came here alone, I was to give you this first," he said. "Before the files. Before the office. Before anyone else arrived." My fingers shook as I took the envelope. The paper was thick. Sealed. Untouched. For a moment, I simply held it against my chest. Henry had known. Whatever this was, he had known the day would come when I would stand in this house, surrounded by secrets, with my son calling from the outside and my daughter-in-law pulling strings I could no longer pretend not to see. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 3 lines. "Maggie, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and they have already started. Do not sign anything. Trust Earl. Trust Callahan. And for once, trust what I built in silence." I read Henry's note 3 times. Then I read it again, slower. "Maggie, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and they have already started." Those words made the room tilt beneath me. Not because they were dramatic. Because they were calm. That was Henry. Even in a letter written for after his own death, he did not waste words. He did not explain what my heart already knew. He simply reached across the silence and placed a warning in my hands. Do not sign anything. Trust Earl. Trust Callahan. And for once, trust what I built in silence. I sat down in the nearest chair because my knees had begun to feel unreliable. Earl stood by the fireplace with his cap in his hands, waiting without pushing. For a long moment, all I could hear was the wind pressing against the farmhouse windows. Then the memories came. Not all at once. One by one. Henry at our kitchen table 3 years earlier, closing a folder the moment Vanessa walked into the room. Henry lowering his voice during phone calls and stepping onto the back porch even in winter. Henry asking me, very gently, whether Daniel had ever requested my signature on anything. I had laughed then. Daniel wouldn't do that, I told him. Henry had not laughed with me. He had only touched my hand and said, "A good son can still become a weak man, Maggie." I was angry with him that day. I remember pulling my hand away, telling him not to speak that way about our only child. Daniel was busy. Daniel was under pressure. Daniel had a wife who liked nice things, yes, but that did not make him dishonest. I had defended my son because mothers do that. Sometimes we defend our children so fiercely that we stop defending ourselves. I folded Henry's note and held it in my lap. Why didn't he tell me? I asked. The question came out as a whisper, but Earl heard it. He looked toward the mantel, toward the photograph of Henry and me. Because he thought it would break your heart. I gave a small, bitter breath. And this doesn't? Earl lowered his eyes. There was no answer for that. The truth was, Henry had broken my heart in a different way. Not by betraying me with another woman. Not by building a secret life on this farm. But by deciding I was too fragile to stand beside him while he fought whatever was coming. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. For 46 years, I had washed his shirts, raised his child, sat beside him through surgeries, and held his hand when the doctor said the treatment options were narrowing. I had watched him grow thin. I had learned the sounds of his pain. I had slept lightly so I could hear if he needed water at 2 a.m. And still, he had carried this alone. I wanted to be angry at him. Part of me was. But then I remembered the last month of his life. Vanessa had been at our house constantly. She came with casseroles and pharmacy bags and that polished smile she wore like church gloves. She would sit near Henry's recliner and speak to him in a sweet voice. "Dad, Daniel and I can take care of everything. You just rest. Dad." She had started calling him that only after he became too weak to correct her. At the time, I thought she was trying. Now I remembered the way her eyes moved around the room. To the mail basket. To Henry's desk. To the locked drawer in the hallway cabinet. One afternoon, I found her standing in our bedroom with Henry's checkbook in her hand. She smiled before I could ask. Daniel needed the account number for insurance paperwork, she said. And I believed her. Because it was easier than suspecting her. Because suspicion feels ugly inside a family. I pressed my fingers to my forehead. She was looking for this place, I said. Earl's face hardened. She's been looking for more than the place. Before I could ask what he meant, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was not Daniel. It was Vanessa. A text. Margaret, this is getting embarrassing. Henry would be ashamed of you making a scene over old property. Come home before people start talking. I stared at the words. Henry would be ashamed. There it was. Not concern. Not love. Control, dressed up as respectability. For years, Vanessa had known exactly where to press. She knew I cared what people thought. She knew I was raised to keep family matters quiet. She knew older women are often expected to accept pain politely, as long as the table stays set and the neighbors do not hear raised voices. But I was done being polite to people who mistook my manners for weakness. I turned the phone off. Completely. The sudden silence felt like a door closing behind me. Earl watched me, and for the first time since I arrived, I saw something like approval in his eyes. What do we do now? I asked. He walked toward the hallway and opened a narrow wooden door. A set of stairs led down into a finished basement, lit by a single lamp at the bottom. Now, Earl said, you see why Henry kept records. I stood, still holding my husband's final note. My grief was still there. So was the hurt. So was the anger. But beneath all of it, something colder had begun to form. Clarity. I followed Earl down the stairs, knowing that whatever Henry had built in silence was about to speak louder than anyone in my family expected. The basement was not what I expected. I had imagined storage boxes. Old farm tools. Maybe shelves of canned peaches and dusty paint cans, the kind every family collects and never uses. Instead, I found a room that looked more like a small office than a basement. There was a long oak desk against one wall, 2 filing cabinets, a locked metal safe, and a corkboard covered with papers arranged in neat rows. A lamp glowed warmly beside a leather chair, the kind Henry used to like because it supported his back. On the desk sat another photograph. This one made me stop. It was Henry standing beside a young girl with dark brown hair. She could not have been more than 11. She wore a yellow sweater and held a certificate in both hands. Henry had one arm around her shoulders, smiling with quiet pride. My chest tightened. "Who is she?" I asked. Earl. Looked at the photograph before answering. Lily Harper. The name meant nothing to me. I hated that it meant nothing. Was she? I could not finish the question. Earl understood anyway. No, ma'am. She was not his child. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Then shame followed. Shame that I had suspected Henry. Shame that, even after 46 years, one photograph could still make me afraid of being replaced. Earl pulled out the chair for me. Lily's mother worked on this farm years ago. Her name was June Harper. Good woman. Hard worker. She got sick when Lily was 9. No husband around. No family willing to help. I sat slowly, eyes still fixed on the girl's face. Henry paid for her care? He did more than that, Earl said. After June passed, he made sure Lily stayed in school. Paid for her clothes, her meals, her college applications later on. He helped others, too. Quietly. Widows. Farmhands. Children who had nowhere steady to land. My hands rested flat on the desk. The room blurred for a moment. All those years, while I sat at home wondering what kind of secret my husband kept behind locked gates, Henry had been using this place to protect people who had been forgotten by everyone else. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered again. Earl opened the top drawer and removed a thick folder labeled in Henry's handwriting, "Margaret, only if needed." That hurt and comforted me at the same time. Only if needed. Apparently, Henry had believed the day would come when I would need all of this. Earl placed the folder in front of me but did not open it. "Mrs. Whitmore, before you read that, there's something you should know." I looked up. His face had changed. The kindness was still there, but beneath it sat something hard. "About 2 years ago, your daughter-in-law came here with Daniel." The room went very still. "Daniel?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am. My son had been here. On the forbidden farm. Standing on land I had been told never to visit." Earl nodded toward the file cabinets. "She said Henry had given Daniel permission to review the property. Said they were considering whether it was time to sell before the market shifted." That doesn't sound like Henry. It wasn't. "What did you do?" I called him. A faint sadness crossed Earl's face. He was already sick then, but he drove out here that same afternoon. He told Daniel in front of me that the farm was not for sale. Not then. Not after he died. Not while you were alive. My throat closed. Henry had protected me even when I did not know I was in danger. What did Daniel say? Earl looked away. He didn't say much. That was the problem. I knew exactly what he meant. Daniel had always been gentle as a boy. Too gentle, sometimes. He would rather let someone else choose than risk conflict. When he married Vanessa, that softness became a doorway. She stepped through it, room by room, until there was hardly any space left where my son stood alone. Earl continued. Vanessa did the talking. She said you wouldn't want the burden. Said at your age, you would probably be relieved if someone else handled the estate. At your age. Those 3 words had become a polite way of making me disappear. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of letters, bank statements, trust documents, and handwritten notes from Henry. Everything organized. Everything dated. At the top was a page with one sentence underlined in blue ink. Whitmore Farm shall remain under Margaret and Whitmore's full control for the rest of her natural life. I touched the words. Full control. Not Daniel. Not Vanessa. Me. For the first time since Henry died, I did not feel like a widow being moved aside. I felt like a wife being handed the truth. Then Earl opened the safe. Inside was one final envelope, thicker than the others. He placed it on the desk and said, "This is the part Henry hoped you would never have to use." My name was written across it again. But underneath, in smaller letters, Henry had added, "If Vanessa pushes too hard." I looked at the words on the envelope for a long time. If Vanessa pushes too hard. Henry's handwriting was steady, but mine was not. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside were copies of emails, printed text messages, photographs, and one notarized statement from a real estate agent named Paul Mercer. I did not know the man, but I knew the company logo at the top of his letterhead. I had seen it before on signs around Lexington, posted in front of old family properties that later became subdivisions. Bluegrass Ridge Development. My stomach tightened. Earl stood beside the desk, silent. I unfolded the first page. It was an email from Vanessa to Paul Mercer, dated 8 months earlier. My father-in-law is declining. Once he passes, my husband and I should be able to move quickly. The widow will not be a problem. She signs whatever Daniel puts in front of her. I read that sentence once. Then again. The widow. Not Margaret. Not Daniel's mother. Not Henry's wife of 46 years. The widow. A legal obstacle. A soft old woman who could be guided into a signature and moved aside. For a moment, I could not breathe. I had been called many things in my life. Wife. Mother. Teacher. Neighbor. Church volunteer. Mrs. Whitmore. Maggie, when Henry was feeling tender. But never had a word made me feel smaller than widow did in Vanessa's hands. I continued reading. There were property estimates. Development maps. Notes about road access, water lines, acreage, and resale value. There was even a rough projection showing how much the land could bring if divided into luxury home lots. 7 figures. More money than I had ever imagined attached to those quiet fields outside the window. Then I found the document that made my hands go cold. A draft power of attorney. My name was on it. Margaret and Whitmore. The language was formal, but the meaning was simple. If signed, it would have allowed Daniel to make financial decisions on my behalf, including the transfer or sale of real property. At the bottom, there was a yellow sticky note in Vanessa's handwriting. Get her to sign after the funeral, before Callahan complicates things. After the funeral. Before Callahan complicates things. I sat very still. There are moments when anger arrives hot, like fire. This was not one of them. This anger came quietly. It settled into me like winter entering a house through a cracked window. Slow. Cold. Certain. I placed the paper flat on the desk and smoothed the corner with one hand. She planned it, I said. Earl's jaw tightened. Yes, ma'am. And Daniel knew? He knew some of it. That was not the answer I wanted. But it was probably the true one. A son does not have to design the knife to be guilty of handing it over. I looked down at the folder again, and suddenly so many things made sense. Vanessa offering to help with my bills. Vanessa insisting I was too tired to meet with Mr. Callahan alone. Vanessa telling relatives I was forgetful, overwhelmed, not myself. She had not been caring for me. She had been preparing witnesses. My phone was still off, but Earl's landline rang upstairs. The sound cut through the basement like a warning bell. He looked at me. Only one person would have that number. Earl went up to answer it, leaving me alone with the papers. I heard his voice above me, low and guarded. Then another voice, sharp enough to carry through the floor. Vanessa. Even from a distance, I recognized the polished edge of her anger. Tell her to come home, she said. She has no business being there. I rose from the chair, folder in hand, and walked slowly up the stairs. Earl was standing in the kitchen with the receiver in his hand. When he saw me, he covered the mouthpiece. It's Mrs. Daniel Whitmore, he said carefully. Not Vanessa. Mrs. Daniel Whitmore. For the first time that day, I almost smiled. I held out my hand. Earl gave me the phone. Vanessa, I said. There was a pause. A small one. But I heard it. Margaret, she replied, forcing sweetness into every syllable. Thank goodness. We've been worried sick. Daniel is beside himself. I looked through the kitchen window at the fields Henry had protected in silence. Is he? You need to stop this, she said. You're tired. You're emotional. And I don't know what that old man is telling you, but Henry would never want you digging through private matters. Private matters. I looked at the folder in my hand. Henry left them for me. Another pause. This one longer. Then her voice changed. Margaret, listen to me. Grief can make people paranoid. You're imagining enemies where there aren't any. I thought of the email. The widow will not be a problem. I thought of the power of attorney. Get her to sign after the funeral. I thought of Daniel standing in my living room, looking down instead of looking at me. No, I said quietly. For the first time in years, I think I'm seeing clearly. Vanessa gave a soft laugh. You don't understand what you're doing. That may be true, I said. But I understand what I'm not doing. What does that mean? It means I'm not coming home to sign anything. The silence on the line was sudden and complete. When Vanessa spoke again, the sweetness was gone. You're making a mistake. I looked at Earl. Then at Henry's note on the table. Maybe I was old. Maybe I was grieving. Maybe I had spent too many years trusting people who had learned to use that trust against me. But I was not helpless. And I was not finished. No, Vanessa, I said, my voice steady. The mistake was believing I would stay blind forever. Then I hung up. After I hung up, the farmhouse became quiet again. Not peaceful. Quiet. There is a difference. Peace feels soft. It settles around you like a quilt. This silence had edges. It sat in the kitchen with Earl and me, full of all the things Vanessa had not said out loud. She knew I had seen something. She knew Henry had left me more than a key. And most of all, she knew I was no longer answering when she pulled the string. Earl took the receiver from my hand and placed it back on the wall cradle. He did not ask what Vanessa had said. He had heard enough from my side of the conversation. For a moment, I stood by the kitchen window, staring at the land beyond the glass. The clouds had begun to part. Thin afternoon light stretched across the fields, touching the fence posts, the barn roof, the gravel road where my Buick sat near the porch. Everything looked ordinary. That was what unsettled me most. A person can be betrayed while the world looks perfectly normal. The grass still moves in the wind. The clock still ticks. The coffee pot still sits on the counter. And somewhere, your daughter-in-law is planning to turn your life into paperwork. I looked down at Henry's folder in my hands. What happens now? I asked. Earl leaned against the counter. That depends on you, ma'am. No one had said that to me in a long time. Depends on you. For years, decisions had slowly been taken from my hands. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious. They came wrapped in concern. Mom, let us handle the insurance. Margaret, you don't need to worry about bank statements. You're tired. We'll speak to the lawyer. At your age, paperwork can be overwhelming. Little by little, I had been moved from the center of my own life to the edge of it. And I had allowed it because I was tired. Because Henry was sick. Because Daniel was my son. Because family is supposed to be safe. I carried the folder back into the basement office and sat at Henry's desk. The chair creaked beneath me. It was the kind of sound that belonged to old wood, old secrets, old men who thought they could protect their wives by keeping them in the dark. I opened the next section of the folder. At the top was a copy of the Whitmore Farm Trust. I had never seen it before. Henry's signature appeared on page after page, beside Mr. Callahan's, beside dates from years earlier. I read slowly, tracing the lines with one finger when the legal language became too dense. Then I found the sentence that changed the shape of the room. Upon my passing, full authority over Whitmore Farm and all related holdings shall transfer to my wife, Margaret and Whitmore, and to her alone. To her alone. I whispered the words, but they sounded louder than they should have. Earl stood near the stairs, giving me space. I kept reading. No sale, lease, development agreement, mineral transfer, land division, or financial encumbrance may occur without her written consent, witnessed by independent legal counsel. That explained Vanessa's urgency. She did not just need my signature. She needed it quickly, quietly, before I understood what it meant. Then I turned the page. A second clause had been underlined in blue ink. Any beneficiary who attempts to coerce, mislead, pressure, isolate, or financially manipulate my wife regarding this property shall be removed from all benefits connected to the Whitmore Farm Trust. I stopped breathing for a second. Henry had known. Not guessed. Known. He had written protection into the bones of this place. I covered my mouth with my hand. Not. Because I wanted to cry, though tears came anyway. Because for the first time since the funeral, I felt my husband beside me in a way that did not hurt. He had been silent, yes. Too silent. But he had not left me defenseless. My phone was still off upstairs, but I did not need it to know what was happening back in Lexington. Vanessa would be pacing. Daniel would be confused and angry, not because he understood the truth, but because Vanessa would be feeding him pieces of it. She would tell him Earl was manipulating me. She would say Mr. Callahan was trying to control the estate. She would claim I was unstable. That word came to me suddenly. Unstable. I could almost hear her using it. The grieving widow is unstable. The elderly mother is confused. The old woman does not understand business. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand and turned another page. There, clipped to the trust, was a handwritten note from Henry. Maggie, dignity is not the same as silence. If they mistake your kindness for weakness, let the document speak first. Then you speak last. I read it twice. Then I sat up straighter. For 46 years, I had stood beside Henry Whitmore as his wife. But that afternoon, in the basement office of the farm he had hidden from me, I became something else. Not a widow waiting to be guided. Not a mother begging her son to choose her. Not an old woman afraid of making a scene. I became the owner of Whitmore Farm. And I understood exactly why Vanessa wanted me away from it. I stayed in Henry's basement office until the light outside began to fade. Page by page, the farm became less of a mystery and more of a map. There were records for everything. Not just land deeds and tax papers, but receipts for grocery deliveries to families I had never met. Tuition payments. Medical bills. Repair invoices for homes damaged by storms. Notes beside names, written in Henry's careful hand. Mrs. Alvarez, roof repaired after March tornado. Ben Carter, mechanic apprenticeship, paid in full. Lily Harper, University of Kentucky, spring tuition. I touched Lily's name again. That girl in the photograph had not been a secret daughter. She had been one of many people Henry had quietly helped while I was at home believing the worst about a locked gate. The thought sat heavy in me. Love can hurt even when it is innocent. Henry had done good things. Beautiful things. But he had done them without me. That was the part one could not swallow easily. I had spent 23 years wondering why my husband kept one piece of his life separate from mine. And now the answer was both kinder and crueler than I expected. He had been protecting me. He had also been excluding me. Both could be true. I closed one folder and opened another marked community accounts. Inside were bank statements tied to the trust. They showed deposits from Henry's personal business investments and withdrawals for farm operations and assistance funds. The farm had not been losing money. It had been quietly supporting people. And still, there was more than enough left to make Vanessa greedy. Much more. At the bottom of the folder, I found a printed proposal from Bluegrass Ridge Development. It included sketches of what Whitmore Farm could become if sold. Gated homes. Private driveways. Artificial ponds. A name in gold lettering at the entrance. Whitmore Estates. I stared at that name until my eyes burned. They wanted to erase the farm and keep the family name as decoration. That felt like something Vanessa would admire. Clean. Profitable. Empty. Earl came down the stairs carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He placed one beside me without asking if I wanted it. The smell made me realize how cold my hands had become. "You should eat something," he said. "I'm not hungry." Henry used to say the same thing when he was scared. I looked up. Earl's face was gentle, but he did not take the words back. "I'm not scared," I said. Then I looked down at the development proposal. That was not entirely true. I was scared of what I would find next. Scared of what Daniel had known. Scared that by the end of the day, the son I remembered would be harder to recognize than the husband I had buried. Earl sat across from me. "Mr. Henry wanted you to have time before confronting them." "How much time?" "As much as you need." I gave a tired smile. "Vanessa won't give me time." "No, ma'am. She won't." As if summoned by her name, headlights swept across the basement window. A car had turned into the gravel drive. Then another. Earl stood immediately. I did not move. Above us, tires crunched to a stop near the porch. A car door opened. Then another. A woman's voice carried faintly through the floor. "Vanessa." Sharp. Controlled. Angry enough to stop pretending. "She followed me," I said. Earl's jaw tightened. "Or she tracked Daniel's phone when he came here before. She may have marked the location." That sounded like Vanessa, too. Always prepared. Always one step inside everyone else's business. Footsteps crossed the porch. Then came 3 hard knocks on the front door. Not a request. A demand. "Margaret." Vanessa called. "Open this door. Right now." I looked at the trust documents spread across Henry's desk. The emails. The draft power of attorney. The development proposal. The clause removing anyone who pressured me. For the first time since I arrived at the farm, I understood that this was not just discovery anymore. This was a test. Vanessa had spent years shaping the room before I entered it. She had softened Daniel, isolated me, questioned my memory, and waited for Henry to die so she could move quickly. But she had made one mistake. She came to the farm before I was ready to leave. I gathered the documents into a neat stack. Not hurried. Not shaking. Neat. Then I placed Henry's note on top. Dignity is not the same as silence. Another knock rattled the old door. "Margaret." Daniel's voice came this time. "Mom, please. Let us in before this gets worse." Before this gets worse. I almost felt sorry for him. He still thought the trouble was me. I stood, lifted the folder against my chest, and looked at Earl. "Do not open the door yet," I said. He nodded. I walked upstairs slowly, each step steady beneath my feet. Vanessa kept knocking. Daniel kept calling my name. And I, Margaret and Whitmore, 68 years old, widow of Henry Whitmore and owner of the farm they wanted to steal, stopped on the other side of the door and let them wait. I did not open the door right away. That small act changed something. For most of my life, I had rushed to answer when family called. I opened doors, returned messages, set extra plates, forgave before anyone asked. I thought that was love. Maybe it was. But love without boundaries becomes a welcome mat. And I was tired of being stepped on. Vanessa knocked again, harder this time. Margaret, this is childish, she called through the door. You are making Daniel very upset. I looked through the narrow side window. Daniel stood on the porch with his hands in his coat pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. Vanessa stood beside him in a camel-colored wool coat, her blonde hair tucked neatly behind one ear. Even angry, she looked polished. That had always been part of her power. She could make cruelty look organized. I unlocked the door but kept the chain latched. Vanessa's eyes dropped to it immediately. Her mouth tightened. Really? She said. You're locking your own family out? I looked at Daniel. Are you here as my son, I asked, or as her witness? His face changed. Vanessa answered before he could. We are here because you are not thinking clearly. There it was again. The sentence used when a woman asks the wrong question. I opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. I am thinking clearly enough to know I will not sign a power of attorney. Vanessa went still. Not completely. She was too practiced for that. But I saw the small pause in her breathing. The tiny flash in her eyes before she rearranged her face. Daniel turned to her. Power of attorney? She laughed softly. Margaret must have found one of those old drafts. Estate planning creates all kinds of documents. It doesn't mean anything. It had my name on it, I said. And a note in your handwriting. Daniel looked at me then. For the first time that day, really looked. What note? Vanessa's hand moved to his arm. Daniel, don't let her do this. She's grieving. She's letting Earl fill her head with nonsense. Behind me, Earl stepped into view. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence alone made Vanessa's voice sharpen. This man is not family, she said. No, I replied. But he seems to understand loyalty better than some people who are. Daniel flinched. Good. Not because I wanted to hurt him. Because some truths need to land somewhere. I closed the door, removed the chain, and opened it fully. Come in, I said. Vanessa hesitated, which told me she had expected resistance, not invitation. That was when I understood what Henry meant. Let the documents speak first. Then you speak last. I led them into the kitchen, not the basement. Earl stayed near the hallway. I placed the folder on the table and sat down at the head of it. Henry's seat, perhaps. Or mine now. Daniel remained standing. Vanessa sat across from me, smoothing her coat as if she were at a business meeting. Margaret, she began, whatever you think you found, we can discuss it calmly. I agree. That surprised her. So let's be calm, I said. I will call Mr. Callahan. He can meet us here tomorrow morning. No, she said too quickly. Daniel turned again. Why not? Vanessa blinked. Because there is no need to drag a lawyer into a family misunderstanding. I opened the folder and took out one page. Not the email. Not the power of attorney. Not yet. I chose the trust clause. The one written in clean legal language, with Henry's signature beneath it. I slid it across the table to Daniel. He picked it up slowly. His eyes moved over the page. Then stopped. I watched his face as he read the line about coercion, pressure, isolation, and financial manipulation. Vanessa reached for the paper. Daniel pulled it back before she could touch it. That tiny movement told me more than any apology could have. Vanessa noticed it, too. Her face hardened. "Daniel," she said softly, "give me the paper." He did not. I folded my hands on the table. "Your father knew someone might try to pressure me into selling this farm," I said. "He made sure that anyone who did would lose every benefit connected to it." Vanessa laughed, but it sounded thin. "You can't possibly think that applies to us." I looked at Daniel. "I don't know yet." His face went pale. The truth was, I did know more than I was saying. But I had learned something that day. Silence can be a cage. But used properly, it can also be a trap. I gathered the rest of the documents back into the folder and stood. "This conversation is over until Mr. Callahan is present." Vanessa stood too. "You are making a terrible mistake." I met her eyes. "No, Vanessa. I am giving you one night to decide whether you want to walk into that meeting pretending, or confessing." Daniel stared at her. Vanessa said nothing. For the first time since I had known her, she had no polished sentence ready. And that silence told me the trap had already begun to close. The next morning, Mr. Callahan arrived at Whitmore Farm at exactly 9 o'clock. He came in the same dark suit he had worn after Henry's funeral, carrying the same leather briefcase. But this time, he did not look like a man delivering bad news. He looked like a man prepared to finish something. Daniel and Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later. I watched them from the kitchen window as their car stopped beside the porch. Daniel got out first. His face looked tired, older somehow, as if he had spent the night hearing things he did not want to believe. Vanessa stepped out after him. She wore a navy dress and pearls. Pearls, to a meeting about documents she had tried to hide. That was Vanessa. She dressed every situation as if appearance could outrank evidence. Earl opened the door for them. No one exchanged small talk. We gathered in the dining room, where Henry's papers had been placed neatly on the table. Mr. Callahan sat to my right. Earl stood near the wall. Daniel sat across from me, and Vanessa sat beside him with her purse on her lap and both hands folded over it. She smiled first. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "I'm relieved you're here. Margaret has been under enormous stress, and I believe there has been some confusion." Mr. Callahan opened his briefcase. "No confusion on my part, Mrs. Whitmore." Vanessa's smile held, but only barely. He took out the trust document and placed it in front of him. Henry Whitmore established the Whitmore Farm Trust to protect the property, its charitable functions, and his wife's full authority over it after his death. Daniel looked at me. I did not look away. Mr. Callahan continued. "Mrs. Margaret and Whitmore is the sole controlling party of this farm for the rest of her life. No heir, spouse of an heir, business partner, or outside party may sell, divide, develop, lease, transfer, or financially encumber this property without her informed written consent, witnessed by independent counsel." Vanessa leaned back slightly. Still composed. Still waiting for a way around the truth. Then Mr. Callahan turned the page. Henry also included a protective clause. The room seemed to tighten. I heard Daniel swallow. "Any beneficiary who attempts to coerce, mislead, isolate, pressure, or financially manipulate Mrs. Whitmore in connection with this property shall forfeit all benefits tied to the Whitmore Farm Trust." Vanessa gave a quiet laugh. "That is a standard protection, isn't it? It doesn't mean anyone did those things." "No," Mr. Callahan said. "The documents determine the protection. Evidence determines whether the clause applies." He opened a second folder. Vanessa's hand stopped moving. For the first time, I saw fear reach her face before she could cover it. Mr. Callahan removed the printed email. "My father-in-law is declining. Once he passes, my husband and I should be able to move quickly. The widow will not be a problem." He slid it across the table. Daniel read it. His face went white. Vanessa reached for the paper, but Daniel held it away from her. "Did you write this?" he asked. She stared at him as if he had embarrassed her in public. "Daniel, don't be dramatic." That sentence broke something in him. I saw it happen. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just a small collapse behind his eyes. Mr. Callahan placed the draft power of attorney beside the email. Then the sticky note. "Get her to sign after the funeral, before Callahan complicates things." The room went silent. Even the old farmhouse seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa looked at me then. Not at Daniel. Not at Mr. Callahan. Me. And in that look, there was no apology. Only anger that I had not remained easy. "Margaret," she said slowly, "you don't understand business." I folded my hands on the table. "You are right," I said. "I don't understand your kind." Her mouth tightened. Mr. Callahan removed one final document. A notarized statement from Paul Mercer at Bluegrass Ridge Development, confirming that Vanessa had contacted him multiple times about selling the farm after Henry's death and had represented that I would be handled by the family. Handled. That was the word that made Daniel put the paper down. He turned to his wife. "You told me Mom wanted to sell." Vanessa's face changed quickly. "I said she would want what was practical." "You told me Dad was confused about the trust." "He was sick." Mr. Callahan's voice cut in, calm and firm. "Henry was fully competent when these documents were signed, witnessed, and recorded." Vanessa looked around the table. For once, there was no soft place for her lie to land. I opened Henry's handwritten note and placed it in front of Daniel. "Dignity is not the same as silence." Daniel read it, and his eyes filled. But I was not ready to comfort him. Not yet. Mr. Callahan closed the folder. "Based on the evidence presented, I will begin formal review to activate the forfeiture clause regarding Mrs. Vanessa Whitmore's involvement. Daniel's benefits will also be suspended pending determination of his participation." Vanessa stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "You can't do that." Mr. Callahan looked up at her. "Henry already did." That was the moment her face finally went pale. Not because she was sorry. Because the farm she thought would make her rich had become the proof that removed her from it. I stood slowly. "Vanessa," I said, "you came here thinking I was a grieving old woman who would sign whatever my son placed in front of me." She said nothing. I picked up the brass key from the table and closed my fingers around it. "But Henry knew me better than you did." Then I looked at Daniel. "And from this moment forward, so will you." Vanessa did not leave quietly. People like her rarely do. She stood in Henry's dining room with her purse clutched against her side, looking at each of us as if one person at that table might still rescue her. First Mr. Callahan. Then Earl. Then Daniel. Finally, me. "You're enjoying this," she said. Her voice was low now. The polished sweetness was gone, and what remained was the voice I suspected she had used behind closed doors for years. I looked at her carefully. "No," I said. "I am not." And that was the truth. There was no joy in watching my family split open at an old farmhouse table. No pleasure in seeing my son's face crumble as the woman he married was revealed in pieces. No satisfaction in knowing my husband had spent his final years preparing for betrayal instead of resting peacefully in our home. Winning does not always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like standing in the ashes with the deed still in your hand. Vanessa gave a sharp little laugh. "You expect everyone to believe you're some innocent victim?" Daniel looked up. "Stop." She turned on him. "Don't you start with me." His face hardened, but his voice stayed quiet. "No, Vanessa. You don't get to talk over everyone anymore." For the first time since he was a boy, I heard my son speak without asking permission from the woman beside him. It should have comforted me. Instead, it made my heart ache. Because I wondered how long he had been missing from his own life. Vanessa's eyes flashed. Everything I did was for us. No, Daniel said. It was for you. The room went silent after that. Mr. Callahan began gathering the documents, sliding them back into folders with precise, careful movements. The formal review will begin immediately, he said. Mrs. Whitmore, I strongly recommend that you do not meet privately with anyone regarding this property. All communication should go through my office. I nodded. A year earlier, those words might have made me feel fragile. Now they felt like a fence being repaired. Vanessa reached for Daniel's arm, but he stepped back before she could touch him. It was a small movement. Small enough that a stranger might not notice. But I noticed. Mothers notice when their sons begin returning to themselves. Her face tightened again. Daniel, don't be foolish. This is your inheritance, too. He looked at the table, at the papers, at Henry's note. Then he looked at me. Mom, he said, and his voice broke slightly. I held up one hand. Not cruelly. Carefully. Not now. The words hurt him. I saw that. They hurt me, too. But there are apologies that come too quickly, offered not because the wound is understood, but because the consequences have arrived. I had spent too many years accepting soft words before hard truths had time to settle. Daniel lowered his eyes. For once, he did not argue. Vanessa stared at me as if I had slapped him. You would turn your own son away? I stood from the table. No, I said. I am simply no longer turning myself away to make room for him. Earl looked down at the floor, but I saw his mouth tighten in approval. Vanessa said nothing after that. She walked to the door first, heels striking the old wood floor with controlled anger. Daniel followed, slower. At the doorway, he stopped and looked back. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be. The child who ran into my kitchen after school, dropping his backpack by the door. The teenager who called me from college when he did not know how to do laundry. The young man who cried into my shoulder the day his grandfather died. Then I saw the man who had stood in my living room after Henry's funeral and let his wife circle my grief like a contract waiting to be signed. Both were my son. That was the hardest part. I'm sorry, he whispered. I did not answer. Not because I did not hear him. Because sorry was not yet enough. After they left, the farmhouse felt larger. The sound of Vanessa's car disappeared down the gravel drive. Earl locked the door behind them, then stood quietly beside it. Mr. Callahan placed the brass key back on the table in front of me. Henry wanted you to have control, he said. But more than that, I believe he wanted you to have a choice. I picked up the key. For 23 years, that farm had been the place I was forbidden to enter. Now it was the first place in a long time where no one was telling me who to be. I walked outside onto the porch. The Kentucky air was cold, but clean. The fields stretched wide under the pale afternoon sun. The two rocking chairs still sat near the door. This time, I did not wonder who had sat in the second one. Maybe Henry had been saving it for me all along. I sat down slowly, the folder resting in my lap, the key warm in my hand. And for the first time since my husband died, I did not feel like I had been left behind. I felt like I had arrived. 3 months passed before I returned to Whitmore Farm without a folder in my hands. That may sound strange, but for a while, the farm was not a place to me. It was evidence. It was documents, signatures, lawyer meetings, phone calls, and truths I had not wanted but could no longer avoid. Mr. Callahan completed the formal review. Vanessa was removed from every benefit connected to the Whitmore Farm Trust. Daniel's portion remained suspended while the legal matters were settled. Bluegrass Ridge Development withdrew its proposal quietly, the way certain people leave when they realize the door is no longer open. Vanessa never apologized. She sent one letter through an attorney, full of careful words and no remorse. It spoke of misunderstandings, family pressure, and emotional timing. Not once did it mention the email where she called me the widow. Not once did it mention the note about getting my signature after Henry's funeral. I placed that letter in a drawer and did not answer it. Daniel came to see me twice. The first time, he cried. I let him. The second time, he brought no excuses. That was when I finally listened. He told me he had been weak. That he had allowed Vanessa to explain things until her version became easier than asking questions. He said he had believed I would be safer if he handled everything. I looked at my son across my kitchen table, the same table where he had eaten pancakes as a boy, and I said, safe is not the same as silent, Daniel. He lowered his head. I know that now, he whispered. I wanted to forgive him immediately. A mother's heart is dangerous that way. It remembers the child before it judges the man. But I had learned something at that farm. Love does not require me to erase what hurt me. So I told Daniel the truth. I love you. But you will have to rebuild trust with actions, not tears. He nodded. For once, he did not ask me to make it easier. Spring came slowly that year. The fields around Whitmore Farm turned green again, and the dogwoods bloomed along the gravel road. Earl stayed on as caretaker, though he insisted on calling me Mrs. Whitmore no matter how. Many times I asked him to call me Margaret. Together, with Mr. Callahan's help, I made Henry's quiet work official. We turned the farmhouse into a small support center for widows, retired workers, and older women who had been pushed aside by the very families they spent their lives holding together. Nothing grand. Nothing fancy. Just a safe office, a kitchen with fresh coffee, legal referrals, emergency funds, and one guest room for women who needed a night to breathe before deciding what came next. I named it the Maggie House. Not Margaret. Maggie. Because that was the name Henry used when he loved me gently. The first woman who came was 72. Her daughter had convinced her to sign over her savings, then told her there was no room for her in the new house. She sat at my kitchen table with both hands around a mug of tea, ashamed to admit what had happened. I knew that shame. So I told her what I wish someone had told me sooner. You are not foolish because you trusted family. They are wrong because they used that trust against you. She cried then. So did I. Not loudly. Not bitterly. Just enough to let the pain leave the room. On the first anniversary of Henry's passing, I drove to the farm alone. I parked by the porch, walked past the 2 rocking chairs, and stood at the edge of the field as the sun lowered behind the barn. For 23 years, I thought that farm was the wall between my husband and me. I was wrong. It was the shield he left behind when he knew I would one day have to stand alone. I still wish he had trusted me with the truth while he was alive. I think part of me always will. But I also understand him now. Henry did not keep the farm from me because he loved me less. He protected it because he loved me more than I knew. I took the brass key from my pocket and held it in my palm. It was warm from my hand now. No longer cold. No longer strange. Behind me, the farmhouse lights glowed softly in the windows. Earl was inside making coffee. A woman named Ruth was resting in the guest room. Tomorrow, another widow would come to meet with Mr. Callahan. The farm was no longer a secret. It was a beginning. And as the wind moved through the Kentucky grass, I finally whispered the words I had not been able to say at Henry's grave. Goodbye, my love. Then I turned toward the house, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside like I belonged there. Because I did.